So, maybe if I have the microphone, I have one first question, and maybe to Paolo. One has the feeling when one listens to your talk that it definitely can't go on like that. There was a huge search for something new in the 90s. There is something new. There is the opportunity that has become very, very wide and very widely used of that digital creativity today. But one has the impression in your conclusion that it could only bring now to a certain collapse. Maybe in 1 year, maybe 2, 3 or more, which is paradoxical because it has become popular, which is one of the means and one of the nice things achieved also by Web 2.0, but it should also mean the end of it. What do you think of that?
Should I take the microphone?
Well, I'll give you the microphone. Otherwise you can... Yeah. Maybe I can move here.
All right. I mean, that's a difficult question to answer. I think that, part of that, say, crisis in how, digital art is conceived and performed has to do with with somehow a sort of natural process of disenchantment with the new that is not that new anymore, right? And for example, the things that you have shown is very interesting because it's a sort of similar kind, especially this Instagram thing, it's a similar kind of engagement, self-reflexive engagement with the new platforms and the new kind of conditions of life they structure. Because that's the thing, right? We don't care about these technologies in themselves, but insofar as they articulate new forms of life, insofar as they become part of our everyday life, insofar as we are fed with these feeds, right? And so that is there where art can really become a sort of device for, almost, I would say, like sociological investigation, really kind of bring in, to light things that otherwise we take for granted, and, really make us think about how we live, how the kind of miseries and pleasures of our life. I don't know to what extent, I'd say that indeed, the Web 2.0 has had huge democratization potentials, right? Sometimes these are kind of excessively celebrated by cyber utopians, by TED Talks, by Wired magazine, and all these kind of neoliberal, techno-libertarian. But there are huge democratization potentials there. Something that I kind of always think about in this case is like how important comments are on, on Facebook or on The Guardian, on news websites. I find myself reading more the comments than the content, actually, right? Because often in the comments there are more interesting things that actually you find in the article, right? Or that you find in a status message. Because it's the reaction of people, right, of common people, to be able to see what people think, and sometimes in all its brutality, right, it's extremely interesting, right? Though at the same time, I think there is a question of the kind of the level, the quality, right, the quality of content, the quality of discourse, right? There is a kind of trade-off, right? I think to some extent between participation and level of discourse, right, which is there. So I really cannot foresee what will happen in the future. I'm not a TED Talks guy. I cannot tell you what will happen in 2030, though I would very much like so that I could make a lot of money with those predictions. But yeah, I think that this is the kind of the crux of the question, right? Is this kind of trade-off between participation and, say, creation. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much for your answer. Would Federica or Elise ask a question, and then we can ask the audience if they have a question?
I actually have a question for both of you, and I would like to go back to the do-it-yourself logics. So I think Juha also pointed out I think a nice complementary presentation also to Paolo's one, because Paolo was focusing on the digital art, and Juha was saying, so maybe these digital artists, you don't find them today on the net because they are in museums. So it's true that it's extremely interesting to see also the came to age again of this digital do-it-yourself culture, because we are living a time of extreme academization of artistic practices. So it's kind of the two opposite. And that was also the subject of the last Venice Biennial, so with a little bit of mix-up between outsider and self-educated artists. But I would like to tell us more about your impression about this phenomenon.
Well, there's a phenomenon that I'm not sure how it's described yet. And I keep referring to aesthetic journalism, but which is an older term that's used for people like Hans Haak and Alfredo Jaar, that are, in a way, like sociological researchers, or more like investigative reporters as artists. But there seems to be a new version of that, or a new mutation, with people like James Bridle and Trevor Paglin and Timo Arnal, and there's loads of them that are not really sure what they are. Sometimes they're academics, sometimes they're designers, sometimes they're teachers, sometimes they're artists, sometimes they're something else, and they don't mind, or they might not even care what they are. They just have this kind of energy and practice, and that keep popping up in wherever content this works. So the satellite lamps are design research from university in Oslo, but they work really well for me in the context of this contemporary art exhibition about the subject of dread, and for the artists as well. So I discussed this with them. So I really would like to show these lamps because they are beyond just a design object. They are as well an autonomous object that could survive in the autonomous context of a museum. And there's a few others of them. So you start to see this kind of... the closest thing that I have come to describe it is the iPhone, where the iPhone is not only a telephone, but it's also a personal computer, it's also a compass, it's also a calculator, it's also your email, and it's all these things integrated into one device. And these artists are becoming like that as well. They're the researcher, curator, designer, academic, all in all in one person. It's kind of new Homo universalis type, but then for the digital age, and it seems to work. There's an infrastructure for these people, and they pop up here, they pop up in contemporary art exhibitions, in hacker sites, anywhere, and their studio might be online, it might be very public, and they all have Tumblrs and Twitters, and they engage digitally with swarms of other people, and it's an interesting development that of artists or creatives that completely not only use the web to its full purpose, but embody the web. They are the symbols of the contemporary internet, which is beyond the web. It's not just the www. It's all the parallel networks that are there through all the systems that we use. The drones are an internet as well, and showing the results and the outcomes of the drone attacks like James Bridle does, but also the hacked drone footage by Trevor Paglin, and then the designs around them. It's showing the kind of the multitude of networks that are there, and the good and bad potential of all the technologies that we produce. So this kind of DIY professionalism in a way, because I feel very much connected to that as well, because in the end I started as a DJ, and I started organizing from playing music. I started organizing my own parties because nobody played my music in Rotterdam. And then from that I started organizing, oh wait a minute, if you just do better lighting and then have different architecture, or you have better designs in different contexts, and that became more curating like exhibition making is. And from that you start writing about your own heuristics on this, and then all of a sudden you have a position in it, and then you make a book about it. But I'm a failed economist. I went to university and studied economics, but I bailed, and it's fine. So in a way, the web gives us the platform and the potential and the opportunity to do all these things. And if you use it wisely, then it rewards.
Thank you very much, Juha. Paolo, would you like to add something? Okay, Elise?
Yeah.
C'est bon? Yeah, I was wondering, just going back to something that Paolo didn't mention today, but I read your book, Tweets in the Street, and something that gave a huge impact on my reading was that actually in the facts, during the Arab Spring uprising, for example, not everyone, and when I'm saying not everyone, a minority has access to the tools. So since the big question of this talk seems to be, where is political art? And by that, I mean, how can we change the world if we all agree that would be maybe the function of political art, since not everyone has access to those tools, but also since not everyone has access, if I think of James Bridle to, his great kind of making visible strategy you mentioned, Juha. If not everyone can see it, I'm wondering what is the real impact on society? And of course, forgive me if I'm playing the devil's advocate, because I really also enjoy your exhibition, but I'm just wondering, how can we actually manage to bring those real questions and endeavors to the rest of the world?
Yeah. I think that, it's always important to bear in mind that, all in all, is minorities who make revolutions, right? It's minorities who are the drivers of social change, right? They need to be sizable minorities to be able to do it, but it's never going to be the majority of the population that actually moves, mobilizes, changes things. There are inventors, early adopters, there are people who make the move, who drive the change. And even in a country like Egypt, in which, before the revolution, penetration of social media was very low, Facebook was around 4 to 5% of the population. Regardless of that quite minoritarian kind of reach of those tools allowed for a kind of vanguard, for a digital vanguard to come together, to coalesce, right? And the digital vanguard then, in turn, mobilized the masses of the people, right? So if it was just for Facebook, forget it, But it was those Facebookers, those Shabab al-Facebook, as they're called, that Facebook youth, that then took to the streets. And by taking to the streets, spoke with the people in the streets, the people who are not on the internet, as they said. They spoke to their neighbors, they spoke to the passers-by, they spoke to the butcher, they spoke to the bus driver, they spoke to the worker, they spoke to the housewife, they spoke to all those other people, and in so doing they became bacteria, revolutionary bacteria, as Engels famously put it. Revolution is its bacteria. They spread, and they became really an agent, revolutionary agent, right? And so I think that's always important to bear in mind this kind of this relationship between the minority and the majorities, right? What is new about digital culture now is that it is becoming more majoritarian, right? It is becoming something that is more part of common people's existence, yeah? Yet at the same time, the kind of this initiation, the process of initiation, of invention, of new ideas, of new memes, is always necessarily the product of a minority, right? We are told that the internet is an horizontal world where everybody is on an equal footing. Forget it. Just look at the visibility of websites. Just look at the extent to which there are monopolized attention, right? Which applies to companies but also apply to people, right? Social movements tend to have often a minority of activists, intellectuals and artists that actually drive the change, right? So it's important to kind of, be skeptical of these ideas of, the internet as a completely open space and horizontal space. The internet is just a mirror of our society, and our society is very unequal.
May I add to that? I agree with that, but the difference now is virality and kind of amplification. Because even if you have just a few followers, if your article, your blog post is read by a few people, if one of these people is Bruce Sterling or Warren Ellis or Glenn Greenwald or anyone on Twitter who has a massive following, and that person shares that, retweets that, all of a sudden you have millions of people or hundred thousands of people you reach. So even small gestures and little things you share become viral, just like the memes. The memes start with an individual or with a small group. But I think what the web gives to this and brings to this is the kind of the viral potential and the speed, the instantaneity of it, the omnipresence of it, the fact that it can travel immediately, and that can have an impact. And if you write a blog post, then another editor says, "Oh, hey, I'd like to actually publish your blog post," and then it comes to a newspaper, like what happened yesterday or the day before with James Bridle article about the failed rendition of an asylum seeker or an immigrant in the UK, and he was deported, and it failed, and they brought him back after 20 hours, and he wrote a really good blog post about it, and that went viral, and then I think it was the New Statesman asked, "Can we publish your article?" And then it goes on a bigger platform. So this is kind of these stacks, and in combination with the kind of the virality and the speed of it, that's make things more interesting and make things spread and make it probably also much easier to, even if you have a small thing like the Instagram, which only 10,000 people follow, but then that gets just fed into I like the bacteria. It's as kind of a swarm, and as a virus, it just spreads through all these different platforms. So they're beyond platforms as well. So it's not just something on Reddit or on Instagram. They go everywhere, and they even get the old school television. It's just a matter of being there and probably giving access to it. So I would say to everybody who makes content, or who is an artist, or is a curator, or who is a researcher, just have a small Tumblr. Just be there and just see what. You never know what person will pick it up or will retumble it or retweet it, because it will give you feedback, and it will give you criticism, and it will give you enjoyment, and it's not the TED and Wired kind of solutionism hype, but it's much more of a personal, direct communication and social connection, which what I like about these networks.
Thank you very much, both of you. We could now open the discussion to the audience. I'm sure there are many questions, and there will be a microphone going around, so please raise your hand if you have a question. There was a question before, no? Wasn't there? Yes, there is one here.
Thank you. I have a question to both of you, and it's a continuation of what you just talked about, actually, about the effectiveness of political digital art or political digital protest. Because, I mean, you talked about in Egypt 4% of people on Facebook, and they went to speak to people who didn't have Facebook, and this began a kind of, this began a real protest, a physical protest. And I think in the Western world, developed world, it's the opposite. Most people have Facebook, and the minority doesn't. So that somehow changes what happens. Everybody talks to each other on Facebook, Twitter, about things that they're not content with, and in fact that it doesn't turn into a physical protest. And I think somehow, we think that actually everybody can voice their opinion in this way, but it doesn't result really in political change quite often. I wondered what you think about that.
Yes, it's very tricky. I'd say, there is a huge ambiguity to these media, right? There is a huge ambiguity in the sense that on the one hand they connect people who would otherwise not be connected, but they don't connect friends. They actually connect acquaintances, right? They don't facilitate strong ties. They facilitate weak ties. So the thing about Facebook is not that we can chat with our friends, actually. Is that we can keep in contact with people who are not actually our friends, but that we know from school, from one day we met them in a gallery, right? And we can maintain the connection with these very dispersed networks of individuals in ways that we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. I mean, our real friends, we would have seen them anyway, right? But that's the kind of added element, is this weak tie element. And the other ambiguity is the fact that on the one hand they can be used for as a means for mobilization, and we have seen the demonstration of that, right? But it doesn't. It depends on the people who use it. If they're able to construct a discourse, if they're able to construct a powerful content, emotionally charged content, right? But on the other hand, they can also indeed produce a situation in which people say, all right, I just tweeted, fuck Berlusconi, whatever, I'll just stay at home, right? And vent off the anger, right, as a sort of safety valve. Okay, now I'm content with myself. I just sit here, watch a movie on Netflix, whatever. I mean, the interesting thing is that in Egypt, the decisive day, the 28th, when millions took to the streets rather than tens of thousands, was exactly the day after they cut the internet. Because by cutting the internet, they forced the people to take a stand. I mean, you cannot be an internet occupier, right? You cannot say that you're with the movement because you're following from home. You decide. You stay at home, it means that you're with Mubarak, or you are a coward. You take to the streets, it means you are with the movement. You are with the revolution. It forced people to take a stand in a situation where it's different than with the internet. There is this idea of teleparticipation that I find quite funny as a concept and meaningful in certain contexts, right? I mean, it's nice that you can follow assemblies from live stream, that you can follow what is going on from home if you cannot go there. Yet, participation still is, to a great extent, risking your life, risking your criminal record, taking to the streets, right? So there is this huge ambiguity, right? We cannot think that these means are completely favorable or unfavorable to political activity. It really depends what kind of articulation is developed between them and forms of gathering in public space.
Thank you.
Do you want to answer also? No. Let's see if there are other questions. There is one. Nadia is going to talk tomorrow also at the symposium.
Thank you for two really interesting presentations. But I wanted to ask you if my observation is correct. It seems that a lot of what we're seeing is reactive, in that they're exploring technology and its effects and producing artifacts from the perspective of reacting to curtailing of freedom, being followed, being observed, of avoiding and escaping dystopia, but not so much proactive in terms of creating utopias to escape to. Do you come across work which is actually taking on the root causes that is driving these tendencies? Why is this happening? And how can cultural producers actually affect this?
Yes. Damn it. I was the dread guy, not the... No, definitely. Metahaven is an example, the design agency who did the anonymous ship. They proposed to create a new way of what is that in English? Freedom of Information Act. That's the English word. They proposed a new Freedom of Information Act service or system, which would be more in line with our use of Facebook and Twitter, and much more networked, and much more social, and much more crowdsourced. And so part Wikipedia, part Facebook, part Twitter, with timelines and comments and likes and shares and edits and wikis. And they just reimagined how do we share and make public the public documents and decisions our governments make. So in a way I would call that utopian in that sense, because it wasn't an immediate response to anything happening. They just had the opportunity to realize this, and they worked together with I think it's IMI, the Icelandic Media Institute, with Smari McCarthy, and who's also a brilliant man, and it's a project that's ongoing. So I think that's one example. I'd say there's plenty of examples of utopian art still, but really connected to this subject. Sorry, I've been too focused on preparing this from the dread side. But maybe after coffee.
Yeah, and it's also kind of the subject of the next session, so please.
Or maybe someone else in the audience can shout one, and then we start from there. Is there anybody who knows a utopian digital project? I mean, there's one actually. There's what is it called? It's kind of like the game Never Ending that started Flickr, but it's an artwork which is like a role-playing game, and you're a deer, and you can just run off in the forest, and you can go anywhere, and you can just jump and drink water, and that's it. It's called the Never-Ending Forest, or the Endless Forest, and it's a game, and there's no purpose. You're just a deer, and it's nice, and it's a forest, and you can go anywhere. It's like Grand Theft Auto without the shooting and as a deer. And you can just roam the forest, and it's fun. And it's a really good work, I'd say. And it's old. It's 2005 or 6. I call that pretty utopian. It's also bordering on nihilism, but it's fun. And there was another work, but that's not utopian, but that's again as a political work. It's the Branch Davidian work by Brodie Condon, which is a first-person shooter as David Koresh, and it's Waco Resurrection, which is a badass work. It says you're a first-person shooter as David Koresh, and you're fighting the SWAT team, and it's also from 2004 or something. Not utopian, sorry.
Okay, is there a last question? Maybe. Thank you. And then we'll have a short coffee break.
Short coffee or short break?
This is a question for Juha. I'm just surprised at the sentence in your abstract, which says that dread has gained ground as the human condition of the 21st century. And it would seem that perhaps dread was the condition of the 20th century, but that actually, given all that we know following recent scandals, it's a lack of dread that characterizes internet usage. We know we're being tracked, but we prefer convenience over security. So I'm just wondering about that one sentence.
No, I would say it's the most powerful human condition since we were made. But it just re-emerged as something that's in the news. I mean, dread as our ability to recognize danger and to fight it or flight from it is pre-programmed, hardwired in us. But after 9/11, with the response to a guy having a bomb in his shoe, and now all of us having to take off our shoes. Those kind of over-panicky responses have put dread on the agenda even higher, and has taken over. And now with PRISM, with Snowden, everything in the news basically is, oh, wait a minute, our entire internet is being surveilled. Now what? Should we have our own internet, our parallel internet? Should we not use American software anymore, or should we stay off the internet? So I wouldn't say it's decisively new and of the now, but it's just re-emerged now as something we're thinking and talking about again.
Thank you very much to both the speakers. Thank you very much for the audience, for the interesting questions. We will now take a 15